Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Fabian. I'm CEO of ResourceX. ResourceX is an organization for many of you who helps deliver your priority-based budgeting solution. But we also welcome many organizations who are here maybe for the first time. I will reference throughout the presentation today where priority-based budgeting communities are leveraging their data for the strategies that we talk about. And then for organizations who are brand new to any of this stuff, I'll also walk through a little bit of the data that PBB communities have and how you can put some of that together as well. Like many of you, the details on the American Rescue Plan continue to come out. So we are in the same boat, trying to make the best sense of what we know thus far for a situation that is continuing to evolve with more information available all the time. ICMA presented yesterday on some of the details. The day before, Mark Funkhauser was presenting with ELGL, and day by day, we're starting to learn a little bit more information. We'll do our best with the information that we know at present, and simply recognize that hopefully as more details come out, we will all have more opportunities to access resources and funding. But we support cities and counties throughout North America, approximately 300 or so at this time. And it was very relevant to us as we started to see the significance of this funding impact our clients and their plans for 2021. We wanted to at least share some of our strategies that we've been talking about with our client organizations. So that being said, special thanks to City of Pittsburgh, City of Fort Collins, City of Ferndale, City of Denver, City of Toledo, and the Government Finance Officers Association, among many others who have been active in our discussions over the last few weeks as we've put together our plan, our 5-tiered plan for how to consider allocating these resources. And as we do get started, I thought it'd be helpful to set the tone for how we are framing the problem, or what we see that you're going through, or what our clients are going through, because as we've tried to frame where you are, it's helped us to understand the solutions. And the best framework, honestly, is trying to see the tensions that many of you all are facing with how to deploy these resources. And I think that might be an interesting, for something that's such a blessing, it comes across, oh, hello, baby. It comes across with some tensions involved for where the resources should go. So we have some organizations who are letting us know, as the funding is coming in, there is a sense of urgency to deploy these resources as fast as possible. That there are people who are definitely in need and who need relief immediately. And so that is part of your pressure is here comes some one-time funds, and you want to get them out the door and serve your people as fast as you possibly can. At the same time, on the other side of the coin, and we heard this from Mark Funkhauser 2 days ago, there is also a recognition that, yeah, we could use the funding to help people who are in need right away. We have to balance that with the worry that we all know the perils of using one-time money to fund ongoing programmatic needs. Oftentimes, if you commit to doing that, it's hard to get out of providing those programs in the future. So it feels like you have layered on some ongoing commitments forever, and that is a challenge. We have businesses, in addition to your people, who are barely hanging in there and they have needs. There is also a pressure from some of our departments for how about just restoring the programs that we cut last year? That seems like a logical use of resources overall. We have some clients who have a current adopted budget right now that anticipates or has plugged in agreed upon layoffs. And so the question is, do we automatically use the ARP funds to keep those jobs? And that's a tension that we're feeling. Then there's the other side I mean, man, the tension is high. The other side is this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to take these resources and really deploy them towards outcomes that are so important, and we might not ever have this amount of money again. So this was even Funkhauser's quote, "Don't blow it." And then, the prudent among us say, well, we should probably start with replenishing reserves. There's no shortage of voices in this conversation, and that's probably a good thing. But given all of the available uses for these resources, it's also not entirely crystal clear how should we prioritize the use of these funds. So given all of this, we have tried to seek an approach that creates the most practical prioritization of resource allocation. That's what we do. And we are going to talk about a 5-tiered plan today that has short-term, immediate needs incorporated into it, and how to begin to consider those needs, as well as ensuring or trying your best to hold some of the resources available for the long term. Now, we have learned, like many of you, that the resources will likely come in 2 installments or tranches. So one way to begin to think about it as well is short-term versus long-term, or tranche 1 versus tranche 2. How can we build up, make sure we have at least some resources available for your short-term, immediate, most urgent needs, while at the same time trying your best to hold resources aside for those long-term opportunities as well. I'm going to, the framework for today's presentation is to walk through literally each of these tiers and describe approaches to achieving them. But I'll give you an overview right now. Tier 1 is indeed trying to address people, businesses who are vulnerable, who are in crisis, to make sure that we are serving them and answering that call for deploying some of the readily available resources out the door right now. The question becomes, where are you going to start? The second tier is, how do we begin to consider stabilizing our budget for any of your organizations who had to dip into reserves or made transfers from capital funds? What is the appropriate approach to begin to stabilize the budget and replenish those reserves? Tier 3 is where we start to transition between some of the short-term immediate needs into something that's a little bit more long-term. And we'll get into prioritizing amendments to a current budget for anybody who has plugged in cuts that they need to address right now. I think that's from tier 3 on is where things start to get really interesting. And tier 4 is recognizing that you are not the only organization in your region most likely who received funds or who is likely to receive funds. And so how can you look outward to your partners for real opportunities to pursue joint ventures, what GFOA calls networked enterprises, where you are both in the business of achieving common results and might have the shared power of your combined resources to pursue them at a time, in a way that is unlikely to happen again anytime soon, hopefully. And tier 5 is what we call big swings, trying our best to hold resources aside for real commitments to results that make up your long term and are going to define your future and your road ahead. Stick with us until the end, because for tier 5, we're also going to make a case that while today's ARP funding comes to us as a one-time abundance of resources, we're going to try to establish an objective with our communities to use those resources to fund innovations that create an ongoing source of replenishable resources on par with what you're receiving for ARP, what the world might look like if you are able to create ongoing repurposed resources as if you're receiving ARP funds every year. And I think that is that's one of our goals, and we'll get into that towards the end of tier 5. I did mention we have a combination today of current clients as well as organizations who might be brand new to any of this, of the data that we'll be discussing today. And so for those of you who are brand new, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We hope that you get to learn from some of the communities who we're working with. We would encourage you, if you are intrigued at all about how you can build your own data, next week, March 31st and April 1st, we have a 2-day workshop for creating data. Eric Keck is on the line. You can wave to everybody, Eric Keck, who is going to be helping to lead this workshop. It's 2 half days, and the session is going to focus on how to build your own inventory of programs and services, costing those programs and services, and also aligning programs with the outcomes that you seek to achieve. So program alignment, among other data layers. So it's a crash course, but it's really in depth as well for how to create this data. And then secondly, for both newcomers, but it's also especially for those of you who are implementers and you have your PBB data, coming up on April 8th, if you consider today's session more 101 on what the strategy is all about, and how we can go about implementing these strategies, April 8th, we will be hosting a workshop to do some more hands-on, getting into the tools, showing demos for how you use your data to execute these strategies as well. So, and again, if you're brand new, you can still attend the April 8th session. It's free. So we encourage you to do that. All right, so let's get into it. We're going to start with tier 1 and work our way up towards the top. Tier 1 is definitely a short-term, immediate strategy for how we start to consider getting resources out the door right away. And most importantly, for what? How do we focus meeting that need and analyze the programs that we have? Denver, Colorado is one of the discussions that we've had most recently, where they were saying, that they did make some reductions in 2020, for example, in pre-trial here, where they have a backlog of cases to hear. It's having an immediate impact. They have an opportunity to staff up again for these types of services. And if they can reduce the backlog, they can prevent people from having to spend unnecessary nights in a detention center, and move their cases along with greater amounts of efficiency. And so we totally get it, and we empathize that this is a wise use of funds, to the extent that we have priority uses for them right away. The general question, zooming out for a second, is where exactly should you start? Do you know the programs that you would start to fund immediately with these resources in order to have the greatest impact on the people who are most vulnerable overall in your community? And the flip side, or part of where our strategy is coming from, or something that we would encourage you to do, is as more information is coming out about the American Rescue Plan, is also being aware of other parts of the rescue plan that are providing additional funds. So we've highlighted 3. There are many more. You see 21.6 billion is also available in addition to the 350 that has been made available for local governments. The 21.6 billion is set aside to help low-income renters pay rent and utilities. So if you have a program that you're thinking of backfilling or making sure has readily available resources, we're simply saying, keep in mind, there's also another component of the plan that has resources set aside for exactly this purpose. Another 12 billion for food hardship, another 50 billion for small business support, with a focus on non-chain restaurants, local and live event spaces. This has been a moving target for sure. As we know, you all know, we've had our attention on the center on budget and policy priorities, as well as the U.S. Small Business Administration. Thanks to Eric on our team for keeping us up to date on all that's taking place. So one of the main points here in strategy 1 is try not to be redundant to the greatest extent possible, knowing that certain buckets of resources are made available for certain programs. Don't inadvertently waste your ARP resources for local government on things that are already being taken care of. Okay, but we still have the question for what's not being addressed by these sources of resources. How can we get down to program data for where we do need money right away? And we have a use case for this, and it comes from last year, 2020, in the city of Boise. In Boise, Idaho, was hit by COVID. It was all unfolding fairly rapidly, and they were addressing their continuity of operations plan. Their objectives, as you see here, involved, they wanted to determine very quickly who were essential workers versus non-essential staff. They wanted to identify programs that still needed to be provided, even though COVID was shutting many services down, and also who was providing those programs. And third, they wanted to get to the programs that weren't being provided, because it opened up an opportunity where those staff members could possibly be reallocated towards any of their new needs that were emerging. If any of you attended yesterday's session on priority-based budgeting specific to the Wisconsin region, you heard Brad Steckert from Washington County tell a very similar story about reallocating underutilized staff who had been deemed non-essential and were no longer providing a program towards contact tracing and also election support, knowing that those were areas that needed additional staffing to be provided. But the process that Boise went through in order to achieve those objectives included taking a look at their program inventory. So this is a program by program discussion. For those of you who are new to PBB, a program inventory is one of the very first steps that you go through. It's just a list of what every department provides down to a service level. And so Boise said, this is the greatest source of business intelligence for us to go back through and look at every single program provided by our departments. And they flagged them. They were making notes on these programs. In their case, last year, it was in Excel spreadsheets and pen and paper on what needs to be provided. So they literally flag a program. We have to continue to provide this program even in the midst of COVID. What programs actually needed an increase, what programs could be provided remotely, which could be paused, if even temporarily, in order to reallocate resources, which programs could be reduced. And so what you're seeing, their methodology, and this is what we wanted to share, was the idea that reviewing every single program and flagging them with what is the direction of that program was their approach. By virtue of doing this, when they would flag a program that was deemed an essential program to provide, they found this much easier in order to help identify the staffing who were essential, rather than starting with staffing and saying, we have a list of positions, which positions are essential and which positions are non-essential. Because they had gone through program costing and allocated staff to the programs that they provide, they could identify those staff because they're already attached to the programs overall. So this gave us a clue. We thought, man, what a great use case as we now bring it back to how do we flag those programs in your community that are going to either need to be provided at the same level or certainly with a service level increase. And we have created, since Boise last year, something called a program insight workshop. And the idea is quite simple. You're going to use your programmatic data as the basis or the foundation for identifying programs that need to be provided at a higher level for this tier 1 overall. So the data that we would advocate that you bring to this discussion includes your program inventory, the costs of the programs if you have them, and certainly any of your scoring or alignment of programs that you have. This will be the data that we can bring to bear as we start to flag programs that serve your most vulnerable populations overall. And the idea is we are doing an insight workshop to bring these forward. The approach, and even if you are brand new to all of this, you can still create a program inventory. And even if you did not have costs yet or scores, you could at least have some insight on the programs that are going to need additional resources for the use of ARP funds overall. It comes in 3 steps, and whether that's 3 steps over 3 days, consecutively, or over a longer period of time, that's up to you in terms of how much time you have to deploy these resources or get to the heart of the programs that are going to be in need. But day 1 is, how do we create insights? So that's the flagging of programs. Day 2, or step 2 in the process, is asking additional questions. And day 3, or step 3 in the process, is getting approval on what you're going to use the ARP resources to fund. If you think about it, all that we are recommending is a shortened budget development process, totally focused on programmatic needs that have implications for your most vulnerable people in your population. To see how this looks in the actual tools, this is how we go through and do a budget development process flow. So step 1 is at the program level. We're talking about what is the program that the department is identifying. Again, we're not starting with line items, and we're not starting with personnel. We're starting with the programs that they provide, because it leads to a much easier conversation. And we are asking the basic questions. Why are you needing to provide this program at a higher level right now? Who are the impacted communities that you're trying to serve? Is there a personnel budget impact? Is there a non-personnel budget impact? Is it ongoing in nature? Is it one time? And then finally, a note on the increase or the level of service change. For those of you who are current PBB implementers, this might be new to you. If you have seen or heard us talk about insight workshops, this is a specific use of the insight workshop functionality to lead a budget development process. If you are not involved in PBB, this is exactly what we're quite confident you do in your normal budget request process, but now we're tying everything back to a program level. Step 2, we would recommend some clarifying questions that help you evaluate the type of request that is coming forward. In our flow, we have some specific clarifying questions that we're looking to address, again, that have everything to do with understanding the nature of the request coming from the department, towards what program and towards what underserved or vulnerable or impacted community, and how much money they will require for the ARP funding. And then finally, there is some back and forth dialogue in our process flow, where there's a social element where from your mayor's office or county administrator's office or board or city manager or budget director, you can have or engage in a back and forth to ask questions. You're just trying to get to a good recommendation for the recommendation on the table. And ultimately, of course, we need to tie this all back to the line items, because you're going to want to know, what is this interim request for budgetary needs that ARP funding could be used for in order to serve the most vulnerable people in your community overall. At the end of our paper, we have listed by tier what the actionable recommendation is. And I just am drawing your attention to that. When we say initiate program reviews via insight workshop, tagging programs with direct connection to your most vulnerable populations, that's exactly what we are attempting to describe. And hopefully that's making sense. It's a very short-term budget development request process. Moving into tier 2, I think this is probably the most straightforward, but it's still interesting. How can we begin to consider, for any of us who used reserves or borrowed money, so to speak, from our capital projects, how can we begin to replenish those? We just had Andrew Klein's on the line. Hi, Andrew. We just had a great conversation, because we're partnering together with the city of Toledo, Ohio. And in the city of Toledo, they were just talking about how they had used capital funds last year, deferring some of their capital projects in order to free up some of those one-time resources and use them in 2020 to offset some of the revenue shortfalls that they were experiencing. And whether it's Toledo or any organization who's done that, Ferndale, Michigan was telling us something very similar. They had plugged into their recommended budget a payback. Short of having the ARP funds, they were planning to use general government resources to start to build back their reserves. That's the wise thing that all of us have to do. But now we're wondering, can we use at least some portion of the ARP funds to build back those reserves and keep our general government resources to fund our ongoing programs? Again, another piece of information, I think Tim Gelson's on the line from FEMA, is that there is a FEMA position, which probably needs some more clarification, but if you've used one-time resources to bridge the gap in 2020, and those are eligible for reimbursement from FEMA, that program has been extended. And if there is the opportunity to use those reimbursements to replenish your reserves rather than your ARP funds, this could be a substantial opportunity as well. I think our overall guidance, some of you on the line have been users of our fiscal health model in the past. We are building a different fiscal health model for the future, but this is just a depiction of how fund balances have looked throughout the COVID era, where many of us might have dipped deeply into our fund balance to bridge the gap. And then some of us are starting to come back and think through, with some of the one-time resources, how can we build our fund balance back? Our recommendation is to create a multi-year plan. We don't have to do it all at once. If it meant taking some large portion of your ARP funds and putting it all towards replenishing reserves or your capital plan, we would urge you to think through what a multi-year plan might look like to slowly but surely replenish those reserves, obviously making sure that you're not going to fall short of any debt service payments or ratios or anything that would impact your overall credit. This is the general guidance that we have for Tier 2. One more thing that was interesting, and I will get into this more clearly in our next tier, but if you are an organization that used one-time money last year, meaning you used some of your reserves or used your capital plan to keep some of your programs afloat with those one-time resources, we would advocate analyzing those particular programs that were funded by one-time uses and use your priority-based budgeting framework to analyze, is it still wise to now reallocate ongoing money to keep those programs going? Are they still of a high priority, or as the one-time resources are starting to be shifted away and you're alleviating the program dependence on those one-time resources, the question, just like a program whose grant money goes away, you will be faced with the question, should we keep these programs ongoing? And this leads us into Tier 3. This is all of these points conceivably are very related, but Tier 3 is about budget amendments. And we talked a little bit about budget amendment in Tier 1. We've talked about different uses of the budget in Tier 2. So now let's talk specifically about analyzing programs in a budget amendment situation. And we do have a use case right now, and it is the city of Pittsburgh. So city of Pittsburgh has an adopted, approved budget for 2021. And that budget includes an approved plan for layoffs, and 2020 included reductions in programs and also deferred capital projects. And so the primary questions on the table include, should we preserve all of the positions that we were planning to lay off? Should we preserve them automatically with the ARP funds and restore those programs to full capacity? And how do we use the PBB framework to evaluate what is the right decision? So if you think about using this might be helpful for, well, it's probably helpful for both current clients and others who have not used PBB before. Here's the challenge we're trying to portray. for everybody, we know what the budget process looks like when all we have are line items. So we have our basic line item data, and maybe a department comes forth and says, hey, for next year, I'm planning on a program efficiency. Hopefully we get those requests in my computer maintenance line item. I need 25 grand for professional services. And I need 5,000 for workforce training. And so my total budget request is 29,000, and it's at the line item level. And for departments, this is the normal process that we go through. And while it can be easy because I'm used to just saying, hey, increase my line item budgets here and there, and here's my business case, it's unclear from time to time what this 25 grand is going to be used for. Professional services, but can I learn something more about the programs, or this 5,000 for workforce training? How can I learn what those resources are needed for? And so in PBB, by tying resource requests to the program level, what we're trying to say is, okay, so here's professional services. Here are their highest priority, highest aligned programs. They're called quartile 1 in the priority-based budgeting system. Here are all the programs that are most aligned with your results. And what the department's really saying is they want 15,000 for environment, sustainability, and resiliency program that has a great degree of alignment with results. And they need 10,000 for this quartile 3, a lower ranking program for expanding public art awareness and opportunities. And as decision makers, we want this perspective, this extra data, so we can say, hey, this first request is more in line with the results we're trying to achieve. That stands a better chance of getting approved, versus this request for a program that, you know what, the program itself is quartile 3. It has less alignment with results. We might think twice about approving that particular request. So in the budget amendment process, we want to have this exact same insight, and this is what we recommend as every organization thinks towards the future. But I think what's very fascinating for anybody who has an adopted budget, it's like a reverse budget development process, where instead of reviewing requests, you're reviewing what was requested to be cut. You're reviewing proposed or adopted cuts to prioritize, fund, or consider reallocating those resources overall. So here is an image of the sum of recommended layoffs, personnel cuts, as seen by the programs in their quartile rank, where again, quartile 1 is most aligned with your results, quartile 2, 3, and 4 are down towards programs that have the least amount to do with achieving your results. And if we could see our personnel this way, these are the actual people who were the sum of all of the costs of the positions who currently participate in quartile 1 programs, who currently participate in quartile 2, but are again ready to be laid off, quartile 3 or quartile 4, it brings totally different perspective. I wouldn't automatically say, yes, let's go back and restore all programs. I would look at this and say, hey, my quartile 1 and quartile 2 programs are probably most practical to restore. They are proposing initially alignment with our results. They make the most sense to consider for restoring those positions and those programs. So here's an example in their data is a wellness guru. That's an actual position in HR, pretty cool. It's quartile 1, and they participate in benefits and wellness administration. Down in quartile 3, think twice is the guidance. Is there a potential to reallocate any of these resources? These are people who are supporting programs that have less to do with results today. Don't we have needs in higher priority areas where we could consider reallocating those staff? So that is first and foremost the recommendation. Can we preserve the position, but also consider reallocating it to a program of higher relevance? Is there any sort of one-year plan to offset the costs of these positions? These are what I selected. They are general funded positions that are subsidized. So might we get entrepreneurial and find ways to generate new revenue? And you can keep the position after 1 year, but you get a 1-year buy with your ARP resources. Or, as we'll get into in the next tier, is there a partnership opportunity? So you have 1 year. I'm basically using that year if I'm the staff position here in Animal Controller 12 and Quartile 3. I work on animal care and control operations. It might not be crystal clear how I reallocate my position, but I might have a great idea for increasing program revenues in animal control or at the veterinary clinic to offset the general funded cost of my programs, or partner. Here I have a 1 year opportunity to consider with the city, how can I partner with another shelter, with a nonprofit, with the private sector, or with another local government. So considering this a 1 year investment for these staff members who are currently in lower priority positions to get a new game plan besides subsidy is the basic idea. And while I say the above example is the review now of the proposed, adopted, or budgeted cuts that you need to amend or that you might consider amending, the exact same approach could be taken with your actual 2020 cuts in service as your departments come back to you and they say, hey, I want to, as the pandemic eases, I simply want to restore what was cut in 2020. We would advocate that you evaluate those cuts, if you kept track of them at the program level, in the exact same way. What programs were reduced? Were those programs aligned with our results? If you're hoping to restore positions that were cut, where do those positions serve in relative to the programs and the program alignment with your results, i.e. what we call quartiles? Moving right along, the tier 3 summary is conduct an interim budget development process to evaluate proposals to amend the budget, tying personnel and non-personnel requests to your programs overall. Here's where we get into tier 4. And so at this point, we've hit people in need. We've divvied some money to get out the door. We've identified programs. We've flagged those programs via a program insight workshop. We have considered replenishing reserves over a longer period of time. And we've also thought through in tier 2, where are people who were buoyed, they were funded last year by the use of one-time resources to bridge your revenue shortfalls. And we're going to evaluate those programs the exact same way. We've hit tier 3, which is budget amendments. And now tier 4 is looking at partnerships. So partnerships are always interesting. We have written with GFOA and Shane Kavanaugh on a topic called networked enterprises and really seen the beauty of what can take place with partnerships. We thought partnerships would come into vogue last year when everyone was having to cut the budget. We thought for survival, we might have to partner. Instead, what we're hearing from our clients over the last few weeks is that partnerships just became a lot more interesting now when you can see one organization with money and another organization with money, and what can they do together in the combined force of their resources to really pursue results. So we want to get it back on the table. In Pittsburgh, this is actually a different style of the same story. They have a parking authority, and this is an entity that is most likely not going to be receiving American Rescue Plan funds. This is an entity, their parking authority, that took a huge hit in 2020 from revenue decline. And from city leadership, the worry is, man, if they don't survive, there's a likelihood that the local government, the city, will have to absorb the oversight and management and operations for this particular authority. And they're not thrilled about that. So the idea is, can we use some of the one-time resources from ARP to fund the parking authority and in part have some conditions, some positive strings attached. In their case, the city of Pittsburgh, one of their major goals towards the future is climate action, and they want to see the implementation of EV infrastructure for charging, as you see here in the picture. So this is one thing that they're considering, is how to be strategic or creative in using those funds and having those funds go towards what the city would want anyway, but funded through their resources for this other entity, if that makes sense overall. And we thought that was a really cool idea. Moving on from this sort of idea, we wanted to just bring your attention to the fact that of the types of skills and mastery levels that we're trying to create in priority-based budgeting clients, leveraging all of your community's resources is one of the four main things that we focus on. We use a blueprint. For those of you who are familiar, you've seen the blueprint before. For those of you who are brand new, it's very basic. As it comes to budgeting, and especially over the last few years, as your community is looking towards the future and you have new needs that you're hoping to address, you need resources over here on the left-hand side. These are services that you want to start, services that need to grow. These could be new capital projects overall as well. We have capital project prioritization. You basically have two ways that you can fund that future that you're trying to achieve. You can free up and reallocate what you already have in the budget, which simply means, hey, I'm going to look at reducing service levels in a lower priority program, thereby freeing up staff and reallocating them towards areas where we need additional staffing. We can provide a program more efficiently at the personnel or non-personnel level, take those savings and fund our new needs, or we could source the program differently, find a partner, offload our responsibility, free up our resources, and reallocate them to fund whatever it is that we need to get into. And that's the expense side, spending your current budget differently. And we also have the revenue side of the equation. Where can we generate new revenue? And that can come from looking at fees in a different way, cost recovery. It could come from grant funding. It could come from ARP funding. And it could also come from insourcing. So the opposite of outsourcing and freeing up your resources is insourcing, where you're the partner who's absorbing the responsibility and you're getting paid to do that. So as we consider partnerships in general, we're obviously looking at the left-hand side of the blueprint. Where do we need growth? Where do we need the combined power of the resources that we're generating? And as we look at the right-hand side of the equation and the insourcing opportunity, and the top right area for freeing up and reallocating the outsourcing opportunity, that's what I want to just share with you a couple of obvious stories, but this is what we can begin to think through. Story number one comes from Eric Keck, who's on the line, who was city manager of Englewood, Colorado. And they have a fleet operation in the city of Englewood, as does every other local government. Nearby smaller city of Sheridan and nearby city of Cherry Hills Village had fleet operations and responsibilities, but had a tougher time maintaining their fleet. Englewood offered a joint venture to provide a regional fleet solution. Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village contracted with Englewood. Englewood's revenues go up. Their costs went up a little bit too, but their revenues went up higher. And now Sheridan and Cherry Hills Village have a more effective fleet maintenance program for lesser costs. It's a total win-win. What does this have to do with the ARP funds? We're suggesting if you have ideas for this type of regional solution, using your one-time money to fund or study or execute a regional solution that will provide ongoing savings for the future is an awesome use of your resources. So that, I mean, this has been part of the struggle before, is almost everybody can grasp this story right away, but they don't have the one-time money right now to carry out what it would take to do a regional fleet analysis, let alone look at the facility improvements that need to be made, merge the vehicles overall and carry it out. But we're saying if you can carve some of that money aside to do it today, you will reap the benefit in long-term, in this case, revenue generation from an insourcing perspective. Or if you were Sheridan or Cherry Hills Village, you reap the ongoing savings for your one-time investment today. Now, Eric Keck turned around in Englewood, and when it came to fire services, the city of Englewood was having a really tough time keeping up with all of their maintenance of equipment, let alone their staffing, and their facilities were in disrepair. This is a long presentation that Eric made back in the day on all of the facilities that were just struggling, let alone their staffing needs and so on. But he found a partner in the city and county of Denver Fire, and created a regional, we just contracted with Denver Fire. Again, same principle, same story. How can you use your ARP resources? We've had this question come up again and again. Use one-time money to create a different way of providing a service that generates long-term return on investment, long-term ongoing savings for the city of Inglewood. This is Eric didn't have to use ARP funding back in the day. He managed to figure it out, but this is a great use of your resources. And that's the principle. How can you look across at your partners and find ways for your one-time investment to create a steady source of ongoing savings? Washington County, Wisconsin did a similar approach. They called it Counties Without Borders. So here's Washington County, if you're familiar with Wisconsin, fairly close to the Milwaukee area. I think we have Alex on the line from Waukesha, and I can finally see it here on the map. So Washington County reached out to its other local government partners and said, hey, there's nothing to signature about every program we provide in Washington County. Might we find ways to consolidate services if it means we can create ongoing savings for the future? They did exactly that when it came to a merged health department. So Washington County has a health department, their neighbors have a health department, they merge, they use one-time resources to fund the execution plan. And of course they have overlapping services and even overlapping positions, but instead of laying people off, they took those redundancies, reallocated them towards providing new services that neither one of the entities was able to provide before, without actually asking for new tax dollars. And now they have a longer term solution that's providing a greater benefit to their citizens. I mean, this is Washington County, and we were talking with Josh Showman last year during COVID. He's their county manager, who was saying their response to contact tracing was even greater than in some of the major metro areas nearby. And that's awesome. So you're using one-time money, in this case, not necessarily an ongoing cost savings, but providing a greater level of service for the pursuit of public health that both of these public entities are on board for. Consider today, if you actually have the resources to execute this, this is a great use of ARP funds overall. Final example is South Jordan, Utah, carried out, we highlighted them in our annual report earlier this year, and they carried out a partnership on who owns the overall recreation facilities with Salt Lake County. So everybody knows what a partnership is, but I think you get our basic push here. You have a one-time chance to create partnerships and really flourish towards your future, and that's what we're saying. In PBB, you have program inventory data. You measure degree of reliance, meaning are there other possible partners, and that's a great place to start. And result alignment data, if you can bring that to bear in your exploration of regional partnerships, that is something we hope that you do. Finally, I credit the city of Fort Collins for Tier 5, and their notion was, you know, when all is said and done, they wanted to leave some money on the table, and not a small amount of money, for what they call big swings. And the concept was, hey, maybe there isn't anything that we can really do. The ARP money is one time in nature, but what can we really focus on that creates a big investment in results that we really care about? We have experience with this recently. Oh, I should have mentioned as well, this is textbook, what we call level 4 mastery in PBB, fueling resources towards the results of tomorrow. The whole premise of priority-based budgeting has always been, how can we take the resources we have, where they're scarce or in abundance, and make sure that we're pushing them towards the results of the future? Now, with the ARP resources, the idea is, how can we really maximize how we are funding the results that matter most to us overall? And we have a lot on the table. Communities like Denver and, well, Toledo, who we talked to this morning, Seattle, Madison, Wisconsin, they have budgeting for equity on their minds. Equity is a major result that needs resources. We have Pittsburgh, who I'll talk about right here, who is really concerned about climate action. You have economic opportunity, of infrastructure needs. How can we use the resources to really make a substantial push towards tackling the challenges that are most prescient, most on our table? So in Pittsburgh's case, pre-ARP, they were part of the American Cities Climate Challenge. They received resources from a one-time source, the Bloomberg program, to fund their climate action plan. Climate action plan was awesome, has a ton of initiatives that they want to do, all with a price tag that Pittsburgh couldn't necessarily afford. So Pittsburgh engaged in using their programmatic data and a blueprint insight workshop to reallocate resources and generate new revenues. And this is the order of magnitude of the opportunities that they were able to generate: $41 million coming from 23 million in resources reallocated and 18 million in new revenue to pursue climate action. Now, you are probably thinking, well, why didn't they just carve out the money to fund climate action? Well, they didn't have it before. This came from repurposing resources and generating new. With ARP resources, we're saying conduct the program analysis. Use one-time money. You might not have 41 million to go pursue climate action today, but use your one-time resources to fund programmatic analysis to generate a more ongoing, steady stream of resources that will outlast every penny of the ARP funding. That's what we want to help you focus on. If you just use your one-time money to fund your goals, that's great, but that one-time money will come and go. Whereas if you can spend it on something that creates an ongoing efficiency or reduces service levels or partners in a way that generates ongoing money, it's as if you're getting those ARP resources year after year after year. We do keep track of this within ResourceX. We are very committed to helping our organizations master repurposing of resources. And what's been totally interesting is if you look at the shift in resources from year to year among a number of our communities, and you compare that to the amount of one-time resources coming from the ARP funds, these are ongoing in nature. ARP funds are one-time in nature. What happens if we can get good at using your one-time money to fund strategies for ongoing reallocation? You call it ARP forever. So if you master 10% reallocation, you can take any problem. We chose climate because a lot of our clients are interested in it, not all. And for 300 billion, you could flatten the curve. For 3.8 trillion, you could create worldwide energy transition that ends climate change. Fascinating, but here's the price tags, right? If you did a back of the napkin analysis on all state and local resources, it's about $3 trillion. If you were able to master reallocation of even 5 or 10% of that 3 trillion, you could maybe amass 300 million per year towards these types of massive challenges. How long would it take to get to the kind of money like 1 trillion? It might take 3.3 years reallocating 10% annually. Let's get back to ARP. If ARP is a one-time installment of resources, we only get 1 year. If we can invest ARP resources to create ongoing resource reallocation, you get that money again and again and again. And that's what we're trying to encourage you to do. Program insight workshops, programmatic analysis, looking through the lens of the blueprint for ways to repurpose your resources in an ongoing nature. It is 3 minutes until the end of the presentation. This is the plan. This is the tiered structure. What's hard to do is say, how much money should go to tier 1 versus tier 5? And our general guidance is that's probably nothing that we can do in a blanket statement because some communities didn't have to tap into emergency reserves last year. Others really did. The better advice that we can give is make sure that you have resources for all of these levels. Do you have to use 100% of your ARP funds for tier 1? Maybe you have to, but if we could start at a position of maybe with tranche 1, you do the 80-20 rule. Take 80% and focus on tiers 1 through 3 and save 20% for tier 4 and 5. And then when the second tranche comes in, focus it for the most part on your long-term sustainability. Make sure you have the money to execute those plans and still have resources for building like your reserves over the long term, like we talked about earlier. I will bring it all back to this. If you are a current PBB implementer and you want to see how you can actually get into the tools and execute on any of these strategies, come with us on April 8th. Liz has posted those links in the chat box. And also, if you're brand new and you want to develop your program inventory data so you can execute the types of strategies we've talked about, next week, March 31st and April 1st, we are making a workshop available in order for you to get in there and learn how to build this business intelligence and hopefully execute on these plans. Thank you above all for spending this hour with us. I know it's a crash course, and we look forward to hearing back from you. We'll share the paper, we'll share the recording, and we would love to hear how you are approaching this. But thanks very much.